And welcome to everybody. I see lots of people, friendly faces that I already know out there, and some new people as well. So thank you for coming out to basically listen to Amir Nizar Zuabi. So I'll be calling him Nizar because that's what everybody around me is calling him. Um, and I don't know how many of you did get to see the walk or part of the walk with Little Amal. Quite a few of you. Okay, so I also wrote some stuff ahead of time so that I won't be nervous and forget it. But uh, Nizar, you were born in East Jerusalem, and you said that it was sort of like a tough little neighborhood near a refugee camp, and that when you were 14, you fell in love with the theater, and that you fell in love with the theater because it was a different reality. Sort of, this is quoting you from one of your own TED Talks, that it was a different reality. It was sort of like full of possibilities, a reality that was free, and that, let me see, a reality that was free, that took you sort of out of the harsh reality that you were actually living. And how do you think that's reflected in some of your work like Little Amal? And Amal means hope, everybody.
Yeah, I grew up in East Jerusalem in Bet Hanina, which is near Sharfat refugee camp, and it's complicated environment like everything in Palestine is. And by chance, I bumped into theater, and it became an alternative reality, a place to think differently, maybe. To tell stories. The ability to become part of a community for a moment when you are living, like a lot of Palestinians are, under political duress. The ability to step out of time, it's weird because Palestine is already deprived of time and space since 48, but this fraudulent place called theater that allows you for a second to take a step outside became a very, very powerful place for me, and became a place to investigate stories that are important and important for me and small and nothing heroic, nothing. Everything was very. But as I started becoming a practitioner. And understanding that this is what I want to do with my life and this is what I want to devote my life to, which in Palestine is a non-traditional choice because life is difficult and you need to do other things and not become an artist. I also understood the responsibility I hold towards my community, my stories, the complicated politics, the reductive politics of the country I grew up in. And I already came to the discussion complicated, right? I already entered this space with a complication because of my personal biography. And I was very, 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 very privileged, and that sounds weird when you think of Palestine. But I was very privileged to be surrounded by people who had a lot to say about the world they live in. And as a theater maker today, it's not taken for granted. And I was surrounded by incredible people who understood the importance of a story. And whenever I am having my doubts, and I have them every morning, between 7 and 7:30, and then from 7:30 to 8 and onwards. But whenever I do have my doubts, I go, stories matter, stories are important. We need to keep on telling them. We need to understand that they're a responsibility and they're a privilege. And telling our stories loudly, proudly, in any way, complicatedly, not superficially, is the responsibility. And I think this is what I bring to the Amal project as well from my point of view. It's what I try to bring into everything.
Well, it's interesting listening to you talk about your complicated biography. Do you want to unpack that a little bit for the audience?
Well, it's not complicated for me. It's mom and dad. And they're always complicated for every one of you. But they're also not complicated. But I had the huge joy of growing up with two very special people. My father is a Palestinian from Nazareth, a horse breeder, an Arabian horse breeder, and a true force of nature, for lack of a better word. And my mom, who was a very brainy anesthesiologist, which means she can get you to sleep very quickly, who was a Jewish woman who fell in love with a Palestinian. And I grew up in a household that was a Jewish Muslim household, but very Palestinian, which might sound very odd for you who don't know Palestine, but for most Palestinians feels very normal. The marriage is weird because we don't have enough of them anymore. We used to have more of them. But this relationship between the Jews and the Muslims is something that Palestine always had and was always part of the tissue of life of the Middle East until 48. So in many ways, it felt very natural inside my Palestinian environment. I never hid the fact that my mom is a Jew. I am Jewish. I'm very proud of my Jewish heritage. I'm also a very proud Muslim, and I love my Muslim heritage. And they do not contradict, which is, again, something that a lot of the Christians in the room go, wait, that's not what we've been told. But for many centuries, the Jews were part of the texture of life in the Middle East and a welcome part of the texture of life in every city in the Middle East. And this changed with Zionism in 48. And it's important to say this because it will contextualize everything I say in a different framing, I hope. And for me, the framing is not the classic tribal, us and them, good people, bad people. I think the world is very, very simple. I think the world is very, very clear. I also think the world is complicated when it comes to our tribal divisions. And this sounds like a contradiction, right? I go, it's simple, but it's complicated. And go, yeah, it's simple because right and wrong are simple. You don't need to be a genius to understand that what's happening now in Palestine is evil. No amount of semantic acrobatics can justify a massacre of innocents. None. No. And at the same time, reality is complicated because it's people, and people are, we're all layers of complications, layers of stories, layers of history, layers of trauma, passions, love. And in a way, that's what I want to celebrate as a Palestinian, my land. My land, which is, we were just talking, I come from Nazareth. I grew up in Jerusalem. My family heritage is from Nazareth. My land where you put your hand in the soil and you lift it up and you most probably are grabbing some prophet by the hair. My land that is full of stories, and whatever rock you lift has a story under it. That layers of centuries, millennia of complication, of beauty, of knowledge, of history. Is what I celebrate in my Palestinian heritage. And my Palestinian heritage includes my Jewishness. It doesn't disclude, is that English? Look at me. It doesn't exclude my Jewishness. On the contrary, it celebrates my Jewishness in the names of places, in the old traditions, and that's part of the beauty of that land. That's part of the pain of that land as well. That they are put in contradiction by what for me feels like a foreign interference. I'm now living in the UK for the last 2 years. I moved with my family. So I speak carefully about my host country right now, but it feels very much as if this foreign interference that started with the mandate created a kink, created a war loop in time and space and history, and I'm very devastated, like every other Palestinian I know, and a lot of decent people that are not Palestinians, and a lot of Jews that are also devastated by what the country that claims to be, that bears their name is doing. And I'm devastated by the loss. I'm devastated by the pain. But you know, and I think the pain is important, and I want to grieve it, and I want to spend time in it right now. I think we can't move away from it, and I think it's important that we speak truth to power and not be afraid.
I think it's important to speak truth to power and not be afraid as well. And we're going to come back to the current situation in Gaza. But on the way there, I want to talk a little bit more about some of the work that you've done, especially Little Amal, which was such a big thing here. And you said that it was at the height of the 2015 refugee crisis that you looked around and thought we need to have a new model of theater, a new model where we take the show out of the theater and out into the streets where people are, where they're walking, and that idea was how Little Amal was born. And how do you think that worked out as you went through the process?
I started my career in Palestine, right? I've always, for many years, I've been a Palestinian theater maker working in Ramallah and Hebron and Haifa and Nazareth, and I created work where there is no infrastructure, where there is no way of doing things, where there is but there is the richness of a story and a need, and a community that needs a story. And in many ways, that was the perfect preparation to be able to lead such an adventure called Little Amal. And Little Amal is not the brainchild of me. I'm one of the people that held an arm of a very big girl and led her across 65 cities in the first walk, and 200 now, I think. Right, Sarah? We're around 200 cities now. But I'm a part of a big team of creatives that created Little Amal, and I'm very proud of being part of that team, led by David Lan, who is in many ways the heart behind Little Amal. I'm the legs. But growing up in Palestine, growing in a non-traditional, non-European structure of theater, or structure of anything for that matter, meant that when I came to lead Little Amal, I had a completely different way of doing things and a reactivity that meant that this huge project can be guerrilla, but still survive the upheavals of a pandemic, because we started walking when there was that thing, I don't know if anybody remembers, called COVID. And all that combined meant that we had to think differently about theater. You know, COVID was a proof that theater should become something else if it needs to if it can matter. And for me, Little Amal was the personification of a theatrical need that I had to leave the black box, to go out to the streets, to meet people, to talk about things that matter beyond the small, intimate space. And the small, intimate space is wonderful. I love it. I'm still active there as well. I still write my plays and perform in theater. I think but there is something about this immediate meeting with the people in places that are real, that are not totally ironed, which offers so much opportunities. And it offers something that I think taps into what we're going through as well. They offer honesty. They offer an honest, immediate reaction. You walk with Little Amal in the street, and if she's boring, people just go away. And if she's not boring, people will walk with you. There is no, I paid £50 and now I'm stuck, so I need to be polite and be really bored and pretend that I'm cultured and da-da-da-da-da-da. There is no pretension. And I also, I love the popular. I think theater for many years has been deprived of the fact that it's wild, it's savage, it's not an cultured little thing. It needs to be reactive and wild and unexpected. And Amal gave me the opportunity to run around with a giant. What more do you want?
And so you said that you love the immediate and the fact that people are reacting honestly as they see Little Amal and interact with Little Amal. What do you think the legacy of all that is beyond the immediate? What do you think, the effect was in the end?
The same effect of spitting in the rain, the same effect of telling somebody a story, the same effect of kissing somebody for the first time, the same effect of rain in spring, the effect that art has. I know we touched a lot of people. That's all the responsibility I can take. And even that is me being very, very vain. Amal has met more than 2 million people on the streets. Millions more followed her online. She meant a lot of things to many people. What is the effect? She's a story, like all stories. I hope she has an accumulated effect. It's not mine to judge or to control or even to claim to create. We throw a rock into the water and something happens. Sometimes it hits a swimmer. Hopefully it doesn't. But that's all the claim I can have for glory, nothing more. We just told a good story and people listened. For me, this is the reason why I do theater. It's a humble, human, small, tiny, wrinkled art form that is wild. It doesn't require you to be an Ubermensch, right? You don't need to have any special abilities except the ability to tell a story and to make people feel something, which is a huge ability, right? But people on stage look like you. They're not dancers. They're not that beautiful. They're not musicians who can do virtuoso piano playing. They're just like me, defeated. But for me, that's why theater is so beautiful. And it happens for a second and disappears. It's capturing wind for a second. You go, oops, soap bubble. And soap bubbles are one of the most beautiful things that exist partly because they're fragile, partly because they are there for a second and gone later. I'm afraid of empires. I find them boring.
Did you say vampires?
Vampires too. Vampires too.
Okay.
Empires. I'm afraid of empires. I'm afraid of the big eternal structures. I find them boring. I like the transient. I like the defeated. I like the fleeting, like love.
I keep quoting you back to yourself, but you also said, as storytellers, we know that people are moved to action because they care, and nothing breaks the wall of indifference more than beauty. And so I think for me, that sums up how I felt about Little Amal when I actually saw her in person, was that she was just beautiful and overwhelming. And you did feel part of something big. You felt, even though it is fleeting, I can still see her, if you know what I mean. And all the people who came to greet her. I know that you said with Little Amal, you told people along a route, she's 9 years old, she's a refugee, she's vulnerable. What would you like to do to welcome her? And if you were going to ask a question of artists and audiences right now, what would that question be?
You know, my question is always the same. I know we're going through a very, 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 very extreme moment. And I don't think that just as a Palestinian we're going through an extreme moment. I think we are going through an acute political extreme moment because something in the world is, it's like a broken record when you hear the records scratching every morning. But for me, and that's in the heart of how I want to think about my art, is that what we do is not about reduction. What we do is about expanding. What we do is poetry. And the difference between a newspaper and a piece of poetry is a newspaper is the reduction of reality into a headline. A line of poetry is the expansion of the reality into care, into where it matters, into where you can live with it and it stays, into where it penetrates something deep within us. I have, art in time of upheaval. I told you in the pre-talk. I was born in upheaval. The doctor slapped me and then upheaval slapped me. Coming from Palestine, everything's upheaval. When was it not upheaval? With that, the responsibility of a Palestinian artist, which is what I am, is to keep expanding. Hate is reduction. To keep expanding. Knowledge is reduction. Keep asking questions. Continuously try and redefine the story, and grace, mercy, compassion, all these big words that for me, you can sum up with one word: be honest about what you're trying to say. And don't reduce it to a political ramming, battering ram. Because a question is much sharper than an exclamation mark. We just finished in November, in late November. We walked with Amal from Boston to Tapachula, which is the border of the Guatemalan-Mexico border. And that walk was incredible. I walked through your homeland. And it was complicated, and suddenly the war started, and it became much more complicated because I was grieving people back home and walking with this puppet in Mexico, and everything was very weird. But I walked through two borders. One was the American-Mexican border, which was an exclamation mark, a straight line of metal in the sand. And it was frightened and it was confused. It was militarized. It was lots of border police covered head to toe with gear, but they were frightened. And then we got to Tapachula, which is a river and is bendy, like a question mark. And people pass through back and forth on these almost, it feels like the passage into Hades, yeah? Carverus is taking you across with this pedaling ship. But people are not afraid, and people are smiling and full of questions and a bit optimistic about the journey ahead and a bit confused about the jungle they just left. And between the two countries, Mexico felt like the better option. The Mexican welcome felt more self-assured, more interesting, more complicated, richer, less frightened. And maybe that's the same for me with the relationship with Israel and Palestine. But it's also how I want to talk about our art, about my responsibility, is not to be reduced into, he's a Palestinian, hence he's right, hence he's angry, but to go, no, I'm a Palestinian and my Palestinianness is old, it's thousands of years old, and it encapsulates a lot of stories and the prophets and their defeats and God and his multiples. And only if I can tell a story like this with complexity can I penetrate the media campaign of hate that, for me, justifies a genocide, right? For me, it's the same attempt to undermine. So I go, I'm a Jewish Muslim. Swallow that. And I'm a Palestinian because I'm Jewish. And I'm a Jew because I'm a Palestinian. Swallow that. And my grandparents, my Jewish grandparents, are the sole survivors of two very big families. They were murdered in Bergen-Belsen. Swallow that, Germany. Don't preach to me about anti-Semitism. And it's complicated, but it's not. And I want this complication, and I'm talking about my Palestinian friends, for us it's normal. For us, this complication is part of life. With the pain, with the grief, with the anger, exactly, you're a black woman from America. You understand that the black body has the complication and we accept the complication. The defeated always understand the complication. I want to invite my Israeli counterparts to come, be defeated again, forget this disgusting idea of empire, forget this disgusting European notion of tall blonde people that are strong and powerful and omnipotent. Don't fall into that anti-Semitism. Become Semites again. Join your people. That's what I'm telling my Jewish friends. Be Semites again. That's what I ask from you. And being a Semite means remembering the most important thing for any religious Jew is V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, which means love your neighbor like you love yourselves. That's the basis of Judaism. I invite every Jew that for centuries were on the right side of history, on the right side of civil movements, from the Black civil movement to the anti-apartheid movement. I besiege them and implore them, come back, put yourself on the right side. For my dead grandparents in Bergen-Belsen. Is this complicated? No. For me, it's straightforward. It's me respecting the heritage of my mom and my dad.
I mean, it's when you say it's complicated but not complicated, and that you carry inside yourself basically the memory of centuries, I do sort of connect to that as somebody who is a tiny bit Irish, a tiny bit Indigenous American, a lot just plain Black American. That whole, what do I remember? I remember as far back as my grandmother and her grandmother and the stories that they told us. And it's interesting, you were saying that when you were in the States, you decided that my folks there were the Palestinians of the States. And I was thinking, since you said that, it's like we want to pretend that we've, transcended all that. The moment when Barack Obama was, sort of elected, everybody wanted to believe, oh, that means that all this other stuff is gone. And then, like you said, you got slapped by the upheaval. We got slapped by the backlash. And you have to accept that actually there's still a lot more to do. we cannot sit back and say that anything is done. There's still so much to do. And as artists, I wonder, how do we do that? Like, this might seem like a little bit of a swerve to you guys, but coming out of Amal, you're now going to do The Herds, which is about climate crisis. Can you explain how that journey started?
It's very simple, because for me they're all connected and they're the same. And when you walk through Europe, you meet a lot of people that have left their homes in Africa because of failing crops and because of, and you meet a lot of people along the way that, and you go, there's a systemic failure that is happening, and of course, the global South will be the first to pay the price. It always is. We always pay the price. So I wanted to engage with that, and by engaging with that, I started. And I'm a political creature, which means I am cursed with caring. I care about the world I live in. I want to make it better. I want to affect it in my small, vain, little, tiny failures. Called my theater shows, but I want to touch the world. I want to, and I think climate change is one of the biggest, if not the biggest issue that we face. Obviously, I started working on the herds long before the war in Gaza started, and since the war in Gaza started, there's always this double. And how do you even react to what's happening in Gaza right now artistically? I don't even know. So you try, you write, and you put it in the drawer, and you cry, and you. So the herds is from the same instinct.
Do you want to describe what it is just a little bit for folks? Because this is going to land in 2025, so in the next year. So The Herds is following on from Little Amal in that it uses puppets, and it's going to have a big geographical reach, and it's going to involve lots of communities and communities reacting to things. But do you want to say a little bit more about what it is?
When walking with Little Amal, I discovered a lot of things. One of the most exciting was the ability to long-form theater, right? Theater is short form. We pretend it isn't, but it is. If you want to know, if you want the proof, look at a play. They're not really long form. And suddenly you're doing long-form theater, which lasts for months. And that became very exciting. The other thing that became very exciting is the pilgrim aspect, the journey aspect of theater that became very, very interesting. And of course, each city is a show for itself. Each event is one theater, but they accumulate and become almost like a novel. And that's where I became very interested in that serialness. And that's, as an artist, as a theater practitioner, became something that became very interesting for me and very invigorating and challenging. With the climate crisis, I went, how do we capture that story? Actually, straight after Manchester with Little Amal, we went to COP. We went to COP because we felt it's important that a little Syrian child appears in COP. That the debate about climate is not a middle-class white debate. It also includes fake Syrian children, pretended Syrian children. And while in COP, I walked around going, it needs to be better than this. Artistically, I'm not talking about the debates. Let's have another talk about the debates. Don't get me started. But you kind of go, we can do better. There should be a better reaction artistically to this. And you start looking around, and there's beautiful artwork happening in galleries, but it's all very, very, very specific and highbrow and a bit distant. And everybody in the climate world talks with you about emissions and biodiversity and 0.5 Celsius and carbon footprints and all these cold words. And you go, yeah, but we're... And I wanted to create something that will create a sensual, emotional reaction. Exactly like Amal. The attempt was to take the statistics, the numbers, the refugee, this horrible word. In Arabic we say barbar, the frightening word, the refugee. And turn it into something that when you see, you fall in love with, or you don't, but you have an emotional sensory reaction to. With that, we decided that we're going to start in Central Africa and march hundreds of animals from Central Africa all the way to Norway. And because marching animals is illegal, so we're going to march puppet animals. So we're going to create huge herds that will take over cities and basically investigate nature clashing into civilization, because we know what civilization does when it clashes into nature. What happens when we reverse it is the experiment.
So I think that's coming to a place near you next summer.
In theaters near you, in streets near you.
In streets near you. I wish we could go on, but our time is unfortunately up. And I'd like everybody to...
Time is censorship.
Time is censorship. Yes, we're being censored. We're being pushed off the stage. You witnessed it. You all saw. Anyway, can we have a big hand for Amir Nizar Zuabi?